Sometimes I feel like we're just going to have to start putting cis men into some sort of daycare. Not all of them, I want to be clear on that. Just a specific type of cis man who goes out of his way to do something that will very foreseeably hurt a bunch of people, only to then show us that they have no shame. When they really ought to. We're talking guys who will post art about breaking lesbians inside a predominantly LGBT+ community space for Pride Month, so not during, but actually for Pride, only to act shocked at the entirely predictable criticism they receive before lashing out, pretending like everyone else is a problem for calling them out on it. It's stunning to say the least, leaving me standing there, asking, what the hell do you expect to happen? You brought this upon yourself. Like, how can they lack such a basic understanding of actions have consequences and yet manage to survive? Hence the need for constant supervision. And hey, if my flippant hyperbole upsets you, just remember, putting egotistical cis men down is my kink. So you can't get offended or say jack shit about it without being some sort of weird Puritan. At least according to some of the logic we'll see later. But before we delve deeper into that, I just need to do the responsible thing and give a content warning for the following: lesbomysia, sexual assault, reparative torture, misogyny, and racism. If you enjoy our work or it has helped you, please consider supporting us via Patreon so we can keep the channel running. You can also help us by liking, commenting, and sharing our work on social media. And I know this goes without saying for my regulars, but I realize this video has the potential to leave my orbit. So to anyone new, do not harass the people discussed in this video. Criticism? Absolutely, please. But keep it at that level. Hi there, mine's Ethel Thurston, she, her, they, them. And today we need to talk about an incident which took place inside the furry community this Pride Month that had a sizable number of queer people, particularly lesbians, up in arms. And that was furry artist Inu-sama, a cis man, posting a Dykebreaking piece, refusing to tag it as such or even tag it as sexual, whilst going out of his way to caption it, Happy Pride. Now, naturally, when lesbians began questioning his actions, Inu-sama listened to them, took the post down, and apologized like a well-adjusted human being. What am I saying? Of fucking course he didn't! He went on to act like he was morally and intellectually superior to the people criticizing his behavior, including those he had very clearly harmed via his actions. And I do mean his actions, as those are a problem on their own, entirely separate to the kink involved. Yes, we will discuss the kink itself, who partakes in it, and its context in the current political climate. But I also need to highlight Inu-sama's refusal to practice safe kink as a professional kink artist, that is to say his rejection of any and all responsibility to mitigate potential harm relating to his art via the use of simple tools. A discussion I feel he's been able to distract from by making out like this entire thing boils down to pro-kink versus anti-kink, when no, his actions do not belong inside the kink community, period. But what is Dykebreaking? Well, it's a euphemism for the eroticization of lesbian-targeted corrective rape. The historic and current day practice of coercing or forcing lesbians to engage in sexual acts with a man in order to break or cure them of their lesbianism. Said real-life violence is, of course, horrific for a variety of reasons. It's rape. It assumes being a lesbian is a bad thing, and it's treating a human being as an animal that needs to be broken, like a wild horse or a baby elephant. Because of this, said kink shares a lot of similarities with race play, which is a euphemism for the eroticization of racism. There are two main groups which consume Dykebreaking art for very different reasons. The first are lesbians themselves, specifically monosexual lesbians, that's to say, lesbians with no sexual or romantic interest in men whatsoever. Now, in spite of being a dirty, multisexual lesbian myself, for ease of discussion, when I use the word lesbian henceforth in this video, I am strictly referring to said monosexual lesbians. Lesbians partaking in Dykebreaking art is something that might come as a surprise, At least until we realise it's not about the guy who is replaceable by all counts. It's about degradation. To be taken and used by someone you had zero interest in, to be reduced to little more than a sex toy with zero autonomy. That gets some people off, which really isn't that unusual when we consider other kinks like water sports or public humiliation. For some, such scenarios are healing, but others simply get sexually excited when they feel degraded. And this is but one means of achieving that. Though here's the thing. The lesbian remains a lesbian after she's engaged in dykebreaking. She doesn't have the delusion that her sexuality has been changed and that she now likes men. The act was degrading in large part because it served no purpose outside of being an act of sexual violence, stripping her of her humanity and reducing her to the status of a mere object. The seemingly much larger group is cis men, and that's where the nightmare begins. For whilst the lesbian is viewing dykebreaking as an act of degradation, cis men view it as an act of validation, that somehow proves their masculinity in a hetero-supremacist patriarchal society, that they're a hero with a magic penis that is so powerful that it slays lesbians, whose very existence is often seen as a personal attack, turning them straight. It's a rape power fantasy, one not merely predicated on degrading an entire group of people, but one that's attached to real-world violence. And I'm not strictly referring to corrective rape here, but all the violence this mentality leads to. Men thinking it's okay to invade lesbian spaces looking to score, objectifying lesbians as items which exist solely for their pleasure, and sexually harassing lesbians, screaming at them that they just haven't found the right penis, which just so happens to be their penis, when they're rejected, as if the quality of the penis was ever the issue. Let me just set the record queer as a trans woman who is engaged sexually with both cis and trans lesbians. Your penis isn't the reason you're rejected. The person is attached to is. Point is, whilst a man in the lesbian's fantasy is typically faceless and interchangeable, he becomes the star in the cis man's fantasy, with a lesbian being his opponent to conquer, to subjugate. And this difference in perspective will be important throughout this discussion. But moving on to Inu-sama, the art in question is drawn from the point of view of a guy who is on his back, looking down at his erect penis as two furry women lick it. One of the women is smiling, very clearly comfortable, and is marked with the bisexual flag, whilst the other is very clearly uncomfortable and is marked with the lesbian flag. The only caption provided, keeping in mind that there was no alt text, was quote-unquote, "Happy Pride." This is a depiction of dykebreaking, a fact made clear in the lesbian's discomfort, implying coercion if not outright forcing. Meanwhile, the viewer is invited into the role of the cis guy to take their place as the source of the male gaze, literally, in this case with Inu-sama's chosen point of view, to imagine themselves as the man who breaks the lesbian. Understandably, some people did not like that. A lot of people, in fact. Many found the post to be incredibly lesbomisic, not to mention generally misogynist, particularly in light of the way the post was presented as a part of Pride. Some argued that the caption made it feel like a deliberate attack upon lesbians, as Inu-sama glorifying the very real violence that so many of them are made to suffer. Others declared the issue to be one of ignorance, a result of Inu-sama being a cis man who really doesn't have an understanding of the pain he's playing with to do so responsibly. Meanwhile, a few declared the kink to be wrong, no matter who engages with it. So there were a lot of different perspectives, people coming at this from all angles and levels. And I need to be clear here, the people who were hurt by this are completely valid in that pain and subsequent anger, even if I disagree with certain elements of various arguments. As we'll get to later, many of these people were just scrolling through their feeds before they were suddenly flashbanged out of nowhere with lesbian-targeted rape art, which many found psychologically distressing, causing tangible harm, particularly to lesbians who would be made to suffer such violence. Which brings us to Inu-sama's response, namely how he lashed out at those questioning his choices, replying with, quote, "Thank you to all the grown adults who see a picture and understand it is a picture," end quote, casting all of those who took issue with the piece and the harm it caused childish. Which went down about as well as you might expect, leading him to quickly follow up with, quote, "All right, I'm bored with the circular logic, so I'm limiting the post. Was fun while it lasted, laughing my ass off. Mute me, or the post, or whatever. Block me. I don't care. Have fun, dude. Curate your own experience." End quote. Again, attacking those who had criticized him, whilst erasing the breadth of the criticism he received, declaring every position to be illogically circular. Thankfully, people can post to their own platform, which is where all the screenshots I provided were taken from. In fact, preventing people from replying to the post only seemed to extend the reach of the discourse, bolstered naturally by Inu-sama's notoriety. He's not a small artist by any count, having 33,000 followers on Blue Sky, meaning the issue was going to draw a lot of attention anyway, but restricting the post seemed to accelerate things. And with that explained, we need to unpack Inu-sama's failure to uphold pretty basic standards of safety when it comes to kink, starting with his failure to properly tag his work. For whilst he childishly lashed out, telling his critics, "Mute me or the post or whatever, block me, I don't care, have fun dude, curate your own experience," he's ignoring the facts that he prevented people from doing just that. Blue Sky has a curation system in which users can individually mute words or hashtags, meaning any post containing those terms will be hidden for that user. It is imperative for kink artists to make use of these to keep people safe. And I say that as someone who does so regularly. Not only have I provided content warnings at the start of every video I've ever made over the past decade, but I myself have written dubcon involving mass murderers. Once again, showing that my criticism isn't anti versus pro. The difference is, I took responsibility for my actions to ensure that the kink spaces I exist in are as safe as reasonably possible. Inu-sama's refusal to take 5 seconds to properly tag his work meant that people could not curate their feed for dykebreaking or any other related term, meaning that many lesbians were effectively flashbanged with graphic depictions of lesbian-targeted corrective rape. At which point, the harm is already done. Moderation from that point can only prevent future harm. It does not magically undo the harm caused by said post. Because this is not a small issue. This is art depicting and trivializing horrific violence. Violence that exists in real life and is only increasing as fascism surges globally. Violence many lesbians have been victims of or have friends who have been victims of. This is triggering. This is PTSD inducing. This can cause extreme psychological harm. Harm which could have been reduced by taking 5 fucking seconds to tag on a few extra words. But it only gets worse when we realize that Inu-sama didn't even bother to tag his post as sexual. The only label that exists on said piece at the time of writing this is the one put there by Blue Sky's automated moderation, marking it as sexually suggestive. Which fucking hell is so far off the mark it'd be funny if it weren't so painful. This is not suggestive, this is sexually explicit and violent. But that initial failure by Inu-sama to tag it as adult, which is the term for sexually explicit on Blue Sky, coupled with his refusal to tag his work relating to the kinks portrayed, not only means lesbians are likely to be flashbanged, but that people who have set their accounts to show only sexually suggestive art are likely to be shown a full-blown corrective rape fantasy. Now, I get that we sometimes forget to label things properly, but once people start talking about the harm your piece is causing, the onus is on you, the uploader, to take the post down and re-upload it in the safest way possible, if at all, before anyone else gets hurt. Which brings us to the fact that Inu-sama tagged the post as Happy Pride. This is very likely to lull queer people into a false sense of security, only for them to get smashed in the face with lesbian-targeted corrective rape. Hell, the piece being labelled suggestive likely made that worse, as what it usually does is blur the piece until it's clipped. So a lesbian sees a friend repost something labelled Happy Pride and decides to check out what cool and empowering art Blue Sky's historically shit automated moderation has hidden away. Only to get whiplash as they're presented a cis guy's fantasy of raping a lesbian to turn her straight. Based on this, I can absolutely see why some people have come to the conclusion that this was deliberate rage bait, especially after Inu-sama followed up with another post, this time singling out trans women, that gave off even more rapey vibes. Acting like every trans woman, which includes trans lesbians, would want to be bred by him since all women want to be bred, that's the essence of being a woman, according to Inu-sama. Once again, he's reducing real people down to objects without autonomy. And that's before we even unpack the idea of using the hypothetical ability to transition people with ease, only to get laid. Can you imagine the level of coercion that exists there? Yeah, that's the thing. All of this is subtext rather than explicit, which makes it difficult to discuss. But that doesn't make it any less important to do so we'll return to this later. Yet all this is why I think the people who were caught out by Inu-sama's post have every right to feel hurt and be angry at him. He's not some ignorant kid posting shit where he shouldn't even be. He's a grown-ass man whose career is literally built around kink art. You do not get to reach that point, professionally speaking, only to show any little responsibility in practicing safe kink. You just don't. And people have every right to call you out for your unsafe behaviour. They're not weird. They're not reactionary. They're people you've hurt through your actions, and they should make that fact known in hopes of improving things to protect themselves and others. Seeing Inu-sama's complete disregard for practicing safe kink and the way he automatically presents everyone else as a problem reminds me a lot of the cis guys who turn up at kink parties and think that a person being present is automatic consent, that they can touch who they like or do what they like before declaring the host are just a bunch of prudes for inevitably kicking them out. A piece being kink art doesn't magically absolve the artist of their responsibility in keeping kink spaces safe, especially not when the resources to do so are so quick and easy to use. If you are a part of the kink community, you have a personal responsibility to keep members of your community safe. No excuses. So those are a number of major problems before we've even reached discussion about the kink itself. Are they ones that can be fixed going forward? Absolutely. But that requires humility. It demands the ability to listen to the people you've hurt without lashing out and calling them childish for having a PTSD response to the lesbian-targeted rape art you chose to put on their feeds without warning. Which brings us to the question of whether dykebreaking should be tolerated, to which my answer is, it depends. Whilst I do not fully understand the appeal some lesbians have for such art, I can grasp the general draw. Like, I can see the logic there, why the neurons activate, and I don't want to punish lesbians for engaging in said kink, so long as they do so responsibly in a way that protects their sisters. Properly tagging stuff, keeping it to niche areas, and not linking it to major events such as Pride. The point is, I do not view dykebreaking as a kink to be inherently evil. That noted, when it comes to cis men, things get real complicated real fast. Because we cannot ignore the wider context of how the violence depicted in that art is not merely real, but is routinely glorified by cis men. Which touches on something I just want to mention real quick, and that's the assertion I've seen floating around that Inu-sama's art is hated because it's subversive, like it's a part of counterculture or something. It isn't. It's status quo. It's how cis men have been treating lesbians for centuries, both in their minds and in real life. There's nothing subversive about a guy raping a lesbian, which is a depressing statement to make, but it'll eat away at me if I don't. Though that brings us to the argument that it's just art, it's not real, which Inu-sama made when he initially lashed out at his critics. And he's right, it is art. But art has the potential to cause harm. A very common case study cited in this discussion is the video games cause violence panic, in which conservatives argue that video games, particularly video games which contain violence, go on to make players violent due to the player participation that doesn't really exist in books, film, or television. Now, this isn't true. A game simply containing violence, even violence acted out by the player, doesn't suddenly turn players into violent monsters. And it's good to remember that and be critical of the claim that X automatically leads to Y. There's just one problem. Video games can absolutely promote violence. There's a reason the US military is willing to partner with the official Call of Duty League run by Activision. It's the same reason the US military loans out military hardware to movies which make them look good. Hell, does anyone remember when the US military withdrew from Marvel's The Avengers because it was unclear who S.H.I.E.L.D. answered to, challenging the assumption of US military superiority? This isn't theoretical, by the way. This has happened. The US Navy once boasted that the release of 1986's Top Gun saw a 500% increase in pilot recruitment. And just as art can get people to go to war for an imperialist empire, it can also be used to teach people who the real enemy is, what they speak or look like, what accent they have, what religion, what ethnicity. The point is, just because violence in media doesn't automatically translate to violence in real life, doesn't mean that it can't do that given certain circumstances. The very existence of propaganda is predicated on the basis that, yes, the art we consume can be used to influence us, sometimes into doing some of the most heinous acts imaginable, as in its application by the Nazis of Nazi Germany. So context and perspective matter. And I'm getting real tired of the complete lack of nuance whenever this topic comes up. And the worrying thing is, there's evidence of this very phenomenon in some of the replies to Inu-sama's post, as seen in this exchange. Quote, "When two girlfriends share a cock and it's obvious which one is incredibly into it and which one is being talked into it, such a good dynamic. When it's a cock like yours, she'll learn to love it. Rainbow flag emoji. That's how it goes, and it's always so hot." End quote. Pronouns in bio, he, him. There's not enough bleach in the world to burn those thoughts from my mind. Just a quick PSA for any guy who doesn't get the problem here. If she or anyone else you have sex with has to be coerced into it, if she doesn't love it and has to be taught to, then that's not enthusiastic consent. That's called rape. This is what is often grotesquely euphemized as locker room talk, or some guys like to say to one another when there are no women present, or they feel empowered enough that they can get away with it, even if there are. This entire exchange reminds me of another infamous case of locker room talk, one you've likely heard before.
You know, I'm automatically attracted to beautiful. I just start kissing them. It's like a magnet. You just kiss. I don't even wait. And when you're a star, they let you do it. You can do anything.
Whatever you want.
Grab them by the pussy. I can do anything.
And in case you're wondering what's wrong with talking like this, here's a helpful diagram of the rape culture pyramid, explaining how shit like this empowers rape and victim disempowerment. I mean, looking at this chat and then back at the diagram, way to tick off the entire bottom row. And that's me assuming that the people responsible will claim it was just a joke. This shit literally provides a foundation for normalizing rape, which in turn enables the degrading of past and potential victims, and eventually rape itself. Okay, but what does this have to do with Inu-sama? It's not like he was out there liking these posts by men joking about raping lesbians. Except, he did do that. Because of course he did. That's what he was eroticizing in his art. Why wouldn't he? But that's also missing the point. Inu-sama's entire post, as a cis man, is sending out the signal that it is okay for cis men to partake in the eroticization, trivialization, and subsequent normalization of lesbian-targeted corrective rape. And this is taking place in a very public setting, somewhere where others can see it, both those who fantasize about it, empowering them, and those who have been harmed by it, showing them just how difficult it will likely be if they ever decide to speak up about such violence. Inu-sama has, in effect, created a breeding ground for rape culture surrounding his art, something which is known to have very real consequences. In addition to this, we have the inter-community antagonism this piece is likely to promote. There are bad actors within the lesbian community who like to present both bisexual women and anyone with a penis, particularly non-op trans women, as a threat to real lesbians. And this piece, in which a bisexual woman does nothing as a lesbian is coerced into pleasuring a guy, possibly having been the one who catfished her into it, treating the penis as the source of lesbian disgust, isn't likely to help things. It gives those bad actors a way to go, see, this is why we need to ban bisexual and trans women from lesbian spaces. So, no, I don't think cis men should be allowed to publicly partake in dykebreaking. I think the risk of harm is much too high, especially given the rise of fascism around the globe. They should be made to feel ashamed for posting and saying this shit. They need to learn that, just like slurs, not everything is for them, especially in public where it's taken as encouragement by other cis men to join in and flaunt the harmful ways they see lesbians as objects to break. Though, just to be clear, I am not calling for said art to be made illegal. I am saying that people who pull this shit deserve all the criticism and ostracization that is thrown at them by the kink community, because this is not safe practice. Normalizing lesbian-targeted rape culture is not empowerment, it's endangerment. And it's wild to see someone choose to publicly make himself a part of that, only to shit himself when people turn around and call his lesbomisic rape fantasy a lesbomisic rape fantasy. Though there's still one question left in my mind, something that's been niggling away at me this entire time. And that's whether this was more than just ignorance and insensitivity. Was there an agenda here, conscious or not? And I'm not the only person to question this. One of the terms used to describe Inu-sama that really stuck with me as I was reading other people's thoughts was the phrase aggressively cishet, with multiple people noting they weren't really surprised with the Dykebreaking post because of how he acts. And this is something that was independently corroborated when I shared a link discussing the incident with a group of friends, with one of them, a professional kink artist, replying with, quote, "Oh god, it's Inu. I don't know if it's related, but I have always had very weird, alarming patriarchal vibes from him." End quote. She actually did a quick run of his profile and brought me a few examples in which women are treated as nothing more than broodmares, with the fantasy being that they pump out babies for an unseen husband, one of whom is even so detached that they create a clone of themselves to continue getting her pregnant whilst they work. So, multiple people, completely independent of one another, have gotten the same vibe from Inu. That is to say, a lot of his artwork reinforces cis-heteronormative dynamics. Now, I need to be clear that I don't know Inu-sama's sexuality, just that he's cis. But even if he is multisexual, that doesn't then automatically mean he can't be heteronormative in his ideology. Many bisexuals, pansexuals, and other M-spec folk have internalized queermisia. In fact, said beliefs and the cognitive dissonance it causes can result in them leaning hard into heteronormativity to try and save themselves from societal violence. I'm sure many of us have met the self-loathing, respectable bisexual guy who refuses to bottom or to take a feminine role and treats women like trash in order to save his masculinity. I also need to be clear that Inu might not even be aware of what he's doing. Heteronormative ideology can be subconscious, with it being taught to all of us from a very early age. Yet it being so doesn't make it any less of a problem, something we all need to reflect on. But the red flags don't merely end with a bad vibe. Seeing people who knew more about Inu-sama talk about him in this way made me go back and reassess some of the things he'd said, notably to exchangers, including the following. Quote, "Some of these replies are the epitome of pro-kink until it makes me uncomfortable. Lol." When a bunch of replies are basically, lesbians just haven't had a good dick yet, it raises some fucking eyebrows. And the artist is a cis guy. I might be a cis guy, but you don't know who I am. You don't know who or what I have been. Don't act like that's some sort of damning piece of evidence that means I must secretly be a bigot hiding behind a kink. End quote. Now, at the time I was confused by the way Inu-sama put the label cis guy in quotes, since I was certain Inu-sama was a cis guy. It's pretty common knowledge unless it's something I've missed, and he never corrects anyone who notes this. So that made me pause and wonder why he felt the need to put the label cis guy in quotes. Which brings us to the other time I saw him do this, namely this exchange. Quote, "What an absolutely rancid post. I usually never kink shame, but orientation play just feels so fucking wrong, especially as a fucking Pride Month post. I personally don't care for the kink, but the caption and identity of who drew it is making the creep meter rocket through the glass. You don't know my identity. Don't speak on it. If it makes you uncomfortable, I'm not gonna argue with you on that. Feel free to mute/block me and move on." End quote. Again, the same quotes around the word identity. Reading these two exchanges in light of the aggressive heterosexuality comments is giving me, "Don't you dare call me cisgender, I'm normal, just the way biology made me" vibes. It certainly fits the mentality of someone who considers themselves the default and everyone else deviant, thus they have a disdain for progressive language that seeks to challenge that assumption. And that's before we even get to the rage baiting in his posts. Because a part of me still can't comprehend how someone could create lesbian-targeted rape art and think it would be a good idea to post that in a largely queer community, untagged, linking it to pride. Like, I know the expression, never ascribe to malice that which is adequately explained by incompetence, but the key word there is adequately. There are limits, and I don't feel his behaviour is adequately explained by incompetence, particularly in light of his follow-up post targeting trans women, boiling their worth as women down to their capacity to get pregnant and fulfill his heteronormative fantasy, in spite of there being many trans women who are not into men. So there is a pattern emerging here, a rather troubling one. It's on the basis of all this that one of the questions posed to me by a couple of friends as I was writing this is whether Inu-sama can even be considered a kink artist, since what he tends to draw supports the status quo. And that's a bit of a semantic issue, since kink in general dialect has come to mean anything sexual outside of an allo-cishet couple engaged in the missionary position in private, but it also has a deeper political meaning relating to sexual acts that are more subversive. And again, nothing Inu-sama has posted, not his regular art, not his Dykebreaking art, is subversive. But I wanted to avoid a semantic meltdown early on, hence I'm only bringing this up now. I also want to be absolutely clear that this last section is my weakest. I sort of began with the strongest discussion about Inu-sama's responsibility to keep community members safe as a porn artist. I feel that chapter is solid, and it's going to take a lot of evidence to change my perspective on that. We then moved on to a discussion about the kink itself, which, whilst historically grounded, ultimately relied on my subjective opinion to reach a conclusion, and I know that there will be people who disagree with me on that. Hell, even some of my friends, including one who was into CNC, consensual non-consent, had what I can only describe as a visceral reaction to dykebreaking as a kink, even when engaged with by other lesbians. So you can disagree with me on that. And lastly, we have this section, which is largely vibes and subtext. But I feel terrible if I didn't bring up these points, only for someone else to bring forward more. At least by marking out these red flags, others can make up their own minds, or better yet, do their own research and add to said evidence. I need to be clear that I am not trying to present myself as the final authoritative word here. I am trying to open this topic up to discussion, whether it be in the comments, or hell, even a response video or article. Yet those are my thoughts on the incident. At best, Inu-sama is incompetent to the point of being unsafe. At worst, he is maliciously pushing a cishet agenda in a way that harms the LGBT+ community. Either way, his behaviour is fucking vile and needs to be reined in. Now, those of you who frequent our channel have probably noticed something different, both in our setup and my appearance. I've been getting ready to relaunch my personal channel, Ethel Thurston, where I plan to talk about a broader range of topics and what Essence of Thought has come to represent, specifically media analysis, kink, and furry discourse. I currently have 2 projects I need cleared before I'm ready to do that, a 2-parter about youth gender identity clinics in Finland, and a video about the rise of Puritanism using the Foxfield Rail story as an anchor for that. However, I'm not quite ready to start publishing videos there, yet this topic feels time sensitive, hence I'm publishing it here. So consider this a sort of taster of what's to come. Maybe subscribe over there if this is the sort of thing that you're interested in. I'll probably do a persona reveal after sharing something, shall we say, big in the Foxfield Rail video. I'm also open to any and all suggestions you might have for stuff to cover, so do drop it in the comments down below. And if you appreciate what we do here and want to help keep us running, please consider becoming one of multiple patrons who make our work possible. You can also make a one-time donation via PayPal or super thanks on YouTube. On that note, we'd just like to thank the following people: Matthew Kovac, Flynn, LuneBat, Boea, Deborah Goldsmith, Higgins the Seagull, Mix Alba, and Peter Cole. And with that, take care, and I'll catch you next time.